Welcome back. This is where we put the decals onto our Thunderbird. We are going to start with the wings and the top of this model. As you can see here, we got the back fins right there. This is the nose. We got the United States over here. On the sides, we've also got our little insignias that they have all over the place on this model. We're going to start by cutting these out. These go on the wings right here. So there are 4 of those. There's 2 on the top and 2 on the back. But we are only going to be doing the top for now because we want to work slow with this model because these decals aren't the easiest to put on and we want to make sure we do it right, which I kind of failed at that because I didn't have any Microsol when I use this. I only had Microset, which really isn't the best thing to use. I suggest using some Microsol first. That way it does soften the decal. The Microset just didn't really do what it needed to do when I would use this, and you see that right over here. I'm going to put the Microset on. Some of the decals did adhere really nicely, but they just didn't conform to everything on the contours on the model like I wanted. So here you can see I'm putting this on. I do want to mention that prior to this, I did spray a gloss coat all over this model. It may be hard to tell, but it is on there because we didn't want any silvering. There is a bit of overlap with these decals when you put them on. The color just kind of protrudes off the edges of the wings. I've got my Microset that I'm putting on. Again, I said use Microsol. It might be a little bit better when you do this. I'm pushing that forward just a little bit. That way you can see where it meets up. So once these dry, you're probably going to have to trim some of the decal back so it conforms better to the contours of that wings on the leading edges of these. So just brushing that Microset on there. Here we have our little logos for the Air Force that they put on that star with the sides coming out. We have 1 on each side. Those weren't too hard to get on. Very little square footage of area to adhere to everything. Doing the other side here, again brushing that Microset on. I did that every time. In hindsight, it would have been better, as I said, for the zillionth time, use some Microsol. Here I'm preparing this whole area for the tail, which is very hard to put on. It was a very large decal. It had to line up with one of the little holes that was on there. So you may want to cut that out a little bit more before you put the decal on. There's that spot right there which I'm trying to go over with that hole because you got some of the clear film on the decal that just doesn't go around that section that sticks out that was actually pre-painted ahead of time. You can also paint that after the decal is already on. You just have to make sure the color matches. And that was kind of hard to do. Here I'm fiddling with the back of this. And with that Microset, it made it hard to adjust. I tried putting some water on there. Wasn't the easiest thing in the world. You have to bring this decal around the back of that wing as well for the tail fin. Put some more of this on there just to, it does soften it up a little bit, but it wasn't the greatest. You have to make sure these line up, and that's what I found the biggest part of the issue with these decals was getting everything to line up where they're supposed to be. I had some overlap on the bottom of the tail fin, which was close to one of those antennas close to the top by where it says United and Force on each side. Make sure that your finger doesn't hit the one antenna that I broke off in the other part of the previous video, even though it's still on there. I had trouble with that. Brushing some of the Microset on this. Microsol, again, will probably work better, will conform. Just consider it lessons learned when you're making models, that you do need the right stuff to do the model properly, and if you don't have it, some things can turn out not so good. So I probably got some air bubbles in there. I wound up having to pop a little of those. Here you can see I'm fooling with that little section that already has the hole cut out, trying to cut a little bit more of that decal out so this sits more flat where it's supposed to. I didn't show you this, but this is the opposite side of the tail fin. I put that on, brushing some stuff on there. Just keep working at it. It's a little hard. I had to cut some stuff right there to get the decal to sit flat on that part of the antenna. A little bit right there on the edge. Like I said, the model wasn't easy when it came to doing the decals. It was a little bit difficult. You just have to take your time with it and do a good job. Here we have the front of this. These I found really difficult because they didn't sit quite well on the edge of the wing where they're supposed to, and you're playing a guessing game on where you're supposed to line these up. They also have the little things that protrude from the side of the plane that we stuck on when we first built the model, and that was also a problem, trying to figure out exactly where they need to go. So here I'm putting on the front of the nose. Notice I never even put on the antenna yet that goes on the front, just because I felt it wasn't necessary to do that. I wanted to wait until the model was done because that's just another part that could break off. With these, again, you're playing a guessing game on where you want to get them to sit. You have to keep squeezing the decal many times to get it to lay flat and to form that seam so the seam goes away. You have to make sure it fits on all sides, the top, and the bottom, as well as the side, and making sure it doesn't come apart. And that was the most difficult part, is lining it up. And you can see there are those two things that stick out there that I had to line this decal up with. And we'll also do the other side. I found it easy to do both at the same time. That way they wouldn't dry, and if you needed to adjust it, you could adjust those when you needed to without having to go back and do it later. So here I am putting them on. I know some people say don't touch the decals with your fingers. I really don't care. That's how I do it. If you don't want to touch the decals, you don't have to touch the decals. I do it. It doesn't bug me. I haven't had many rip. If I do, that's all on me. So here we go. We're trying to get this set up. And remember, the problem with this is both decals are still a little wet, so they also both dry and they both move at the same time. It's kind of a contradictory thing, but you have to be careful with it. We want to make sure it lines up. You see you have those grooves right there. This goes in the center of the plane on the intake. It's a little flimsy. Be careful. I had some trouble with this one as well. As I did state earlier, I had trouble with every decal putting on this model. They were not the easiest because they're large decals. It's covering the whole thing. Unless you feel like painting everything by hand and doing pinstriping, if you can do that, I commend you, and you're a better modeler than me. Not saying I'm a great modeler, but it's really hard to do with the way this model is, and these decals do have a lot of detail to them. So, just work carefully with them. Be careful. As you can see, they're flimsy. They go all over the place. Not the easiest to put on. You have to work this one around the wheel well. I have difficulty doing that because it slides all over the place. Even with the Microset, I still had trouble lining it up in the center, which is just the way this model is. So, as I said again, take your time. Go slowly. Things will fall into place where they're supposed to. One thing you will need to do, I'll point this out now, is that once you see my finger move here, in between the two rear wheels, you'll need to paint that as well because there's nothing there. I do put on the ECM pod later on because this is the Warbird model, which not a lot of people are going to be doing that version unless they decide to do some hybrid kits like I did, and that is half the reason you're probably watching this, because you want to see what this Warbird's going to turn out like after the fact. And it looked really good, I can tell you that, and you will see on the next video coming after this one. So stay tuned for that one as we continue to put more of the decals on. And I'm just showing you this, that how much trouble these decals actually give me, because they don't always sit right. Sometimes they get a little too high, sometimes they're a little too low. I was constantly adjusting these to get them where they needed to be. Got a Q-tip here to try and work away some of the excess water that's inside. Do get a couple of air bubbles in there. So patience is a virtue when it comes to this model. You have to be able to have a good day to just sit down when nobody bugs you and just work all the lines out of this, work the water out, work the air bubbles out. Make sure the decal is sitting properly. Put some Microsol on there if it sets well. Put the Microset down as well. So the whole key is to getting this where you want it positioned so it looks good on the model. I did the best I could. I did the best with my skill set. The more and more I do it, I'm sure the better I will get working with larger decals, because I've never really had experience doing it. But it's good for you guys to see how others do them, and you can learn from other people's mistakes as well. Oh, by the way, you see off to the side there, that tail hook, that area painted was way too much. I didn't have to do nearly that much, because you'll see the two decals that go over there, they cover pretty much all that with the small section that's exposed, which is basically just the tail hook itself. And you see, I'm still actually working on this decal. I've been talking for, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes just trying to get this one setting right. And you can see it's just, you just have to really take your time, as I've stated many times earlier. It's not the easiest model decal in the world, but it's really rewarding when you're finished with it, I can say that. Putting on the opposite side now. As you can see, I still have trouble with that. Getting it around the wheel well. That wasn't easy. And it's just, you just have to work with these things. So the little thing that I'm having trouble with right there, if you are building this model, that's one of the problems with this kit. You can see I left it. That's why it looks funny. It's hanging up. I'm sticking this inside the intake. But the problem with the kit is the directions basically call for you to do a regular F-16. It comes with Thunderbird decals. And that's the problem, is that when you go to put some of this stuff on, it shouldn't be on the model to do the decals. You have to actually add it later. So here, this is why those real stabilizers aren't even on there, because I actually broke them off. Another guy on YouTube did the same thing. He broke his off in order to get everything to set properly. So I'm just pressing this decal down. You have to make sure it lines up with that hole in that slot, because we need to put those stabilizing fins back on. Pay attention here. You can see where my finger is. That's actually supposed to be white behind some of that, but because I painted way too much of this, it doesn't show through. But I kind of correct that in the end. I go through and I cut away the clear gloss of the decal, and I slowly scrape away the paint, the blue paint, because there's still white paint underneath, and it left it, and I kind of went over that a little bit, and it still left that, I guess you could say, tail design. And you can see it right here. If you follow the insert slot where the tail fins go, there's still that clear white line there that now has turned blue because, well, that was my mistake. I overpainted, but I figure maybe I can try and correct this in the end, and that's what I did. Now these ones I didn't have as much trouble getting to lay flat. Maybe that's just because of where they were on the model. Again, I'm using Q-tips here to help press everything down, and that helped out quite a bit. It would get some excess glue. The Microsol, I'm sure, would come in handy right here. Now you can see that tail hook. You can see how much it's actually covered by the decal. This wasn't so hard to get on there. Just getting the alignment right was a little bit of a problem, so you may want to keep it wet underneath there. I had to cut a little bit away there, make sure it lines up. It does go right to the edge of the wing in that little like overlap round section there. We're putting on the other side. This was one of the easier ones to put on. The only problems I had, because I didn't have Microsol, is where the missiles are supposed to go. It sticks up a little bit, so I had trouble with that because the Microsol didn't really dissolve it enough. And also, me trying to get those to lay flat in the other videos that I do, I had to cut it, put some little pinholes in there. I kept putting Microset on it over and over again, thinking, well, maybe that will soften it because it says you can do that with the instructions. But it just really didn't do what I was looking for. I wound up going out eventually and getting some Microsol. So if I ever do this model again, I'm definitely going to use some Microsol on it because that is the way to go. So here's where I also had some trouble. Putting these on, you have to slide the edge of that decal underneath the intake. So you can use an X-Acto knife, or you can kind of just slide it on in there. I don't show all of this one because it would be wasting your time, but the one I'm putting on now, I show the easier way to do it, where you kind of just slide it on in and then just use stuff to push it inside of that. Be careful not to break anything on the model when you're doing it, of course. So you see I slide it in, I use a brush, probably use my finger a couple times. See, just like that, slides right on in. Make sure you want to line it up nice. The problem is, as I said, is the edges don't really line up quite right with the edge of that leading thing of the wing there that sticks out. And that was the hardest part of this model, was getting things to line up where they were supposed to. This one wasn't too hard. You just have to work it a little bit, keep it half wet, half dry. That goes on those stabilizer fins that go on the underside of this model that I was talking about earlier. So we have one on there. We're going to put one on the other side. It's a thin decal. It's just a stripe. Work with it. Make sure you have it straight. It lifts up a little bit there. Keep it dry once you do have it on. That way it's not shifting around. You see I'm just moving it a little bit. I want to get it to look somewhat decent and nice. Working with decals that are thin, even like this, and with the SR71, if you ever do an SR71, it's kind of like the same thing. It has very thin line decals. Maybe even better just to get some pinstriping and that matches the same size and pinstripe the things. It might be easier. So here we have this. It works out. I've got that one on. I'm going to move that into place. Once it's moved into place, we will be good to go. And these can be glued onto the model afterwards, and that's a good thing about these. So once I have this in place, we're going to work on the underside of this model a little bit more. We've got those decals that we're going to put on the wings. Here they are. Remember I talked about how the colors stick out from the edge of the wing. So I did my best to try and lay these flat on that edge. I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I had a little trouble. People with more experience can probably post a couple of tips on there. I wouldn't mind you posting tips because we're all here to learn and we like watching these videos and just seeing how other people do stuff. So you see me getting this to the edge there. I tried basically letting the whole decal dry and then using the Microset to brush it down and hope it slowly softened. Maybe the Microsol would be better at doing that to where it could soften and flap around the edges of those wings and lay nice and flat. You see that other wing there? On the wing I have that one already done. Just going to try and move this in position, let it dry. Doing the tail fins right here. Going to let those dry. Of course the stabilizers that they move up and down. Didn't have a lot of trouble. I honestly thought I put these on earlier in the model, but I guess I didn't. So we're doing that here. Just getting those on. These were fairly easy to put on. I didn't have a lot of trouble. Just lining them up was the only thing, and the fact that they extend past the wing. So here you see what I was talking about earlier, where the missiles would go. These are all the little air bubbles that I had and things like that. Didn't make it easy to put that stuff on. So if you have the Microsol on there, that may be one of the things that you'll need to use to get these to stay. That way they're not going anywhere, and the pin drops, if you poke pinholes in there, it can get it to start laying flat. I'm putting on these stabilizers right here. This one was a little loose, so it tended to fall down. I had to hold that one while the glue dried. The other one just kind of popped in. You can see a little bit from where I over painted. Here I'm printing out my custom decals, or at least showing you how I do it. I didn't use this exact paper because this printer, the decal rubbed right off because it was laserjet and I was using an inkjet printer. So I wound up printing these on a laserjet because I had the laserjet paper. Now I made these decals by looking at a picture of a warbird using Photoshop, and that's how I got the numbers. They're on here. That concludes this video. As always, subscribe, comment, and like.